Hi, everybody, and welcome to Cultivate. I'm going to start by acknowledging the land that we're on right now. So, Sketch acknowledges that we are living and working in the traditional territories of the Anishinaabeg in Toronto, which is a Mohawk term, covered by Treaty 13, which has been stewarded since time immemorial to this very day by the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently by the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nation, and is home to many Indigenous peoples. We are learning that this acknowledgement includes respecting Indigenous nationhood and lands as well as the traditional laws, governance, and treaties standing for their protection. We are learning these territories are guided by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, a treaty between the Anishinaabeg, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee to peaceably share and protect the lands and waters. We recognize the violent impacts caused by colonialism that continue to affect Indigenous lands, cultures, and peoples. We also recognize the prevalence of racist ideas and policies that have been born of white supremacy and capitalism that has driven colonization. The racist ideas and policies that have led to systemic violence against Black persons and people of color. We seek to live and work in solidarity, building greater awareness, reflexivity, and knowledge to support the self-determination, justice, and leadership of Indigenous, Black, and all racialized peoples of Turtle Island. Welcome. I'd also like to acknowledge some funders. So this project and this night has been funded in part by the Government of Canada's Skills for Success program, as well as the Government of Canada's Community Support, Multiculturalism, and Anti-Racism program. Additional support for Next Step and the Legal Lab comes from Government of Canada's Supporting Black Canadian Communities Initiative and the Tropic-Canada Community Services, Toronto Arts Council, Aubrey and Marla Dean Foundation, and the TD Bank Group. For those of us who are online, I just want to let you know that we have online proxies to help facilitate the in-person or online rooms engaging with each other. So if you can't hear, or if you want someone to raise a question for you, or you need any accommodations online, please let Jackie in the chat know. So welcome to Cultivate, and welcome to Sketch. Sketch is very much about building skills and connecting creative community. This spring, we're taking a slightly different approach, a peek inside the how and why of what we do as a community, as opposed to showing you the what was done. Being a hub for many different artists and creative community has privileged this space to deepen our learning, to build solidarity, and to gain insight into the wisdom of the artists and their inspirations as they come through and create. These days, as a community, we are all still processing the painful lessons of the pandemic. The incredible rise in cost of living, the increase in division and expressions of hate, the rise in violent language, action, and policy towards the trans community. There remains a huge amount of urgency across the city. In that context, it's actually my deep honor to present to you a number of artists and activists who are utilizing their creativity and insight to attempt to address these issues, to make visible the root causes, and to propose alternatives. They're coming into this through the lens of creation and art, but in my opinion, I'm sure there will be lessons. There will be lessons for all of us in this city who are grappling with financial and historical hostilities, who want to live a rich life in a community that looks after each other. I'm hoping that there will be insights for those of us in this city who are supporting the arts infrastructure, who are resourcing artists and organizations. I believe there will be lessons on the importance of mutual aid, on care, on pace, on resourcing people in ways that build bridges instead of locking doors behind them. I'd love to share one of the ways we hold space together, both in person and virtually, whether in program or as we gather. These are the Sketch community agreements, and they'll be kind of a basis for how we share space together today. The first one, and just FYI, the community agreements are the result of multiple decades of working in community and asking artists what would it take for them to be their freest creative selves. So unsurprisingly, the first one is we ask everybody to be themselves, to share your unique voice, and to accept people as they are, including their pronouns. Share your ideas and let us know what you need to create art. Inspired by the dish with one spoon wampum, we find it very important to share resources. Take what you need, don't waste, use materials safely, and clean up. Be mindful of how much time and space that you use. We take addressing discrimination seriously here. We will address any harms rooted in internalized, interpersonal, or systemic discrimination, particularly that which disproportionately impacts queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, racialized, and disabled communities. We are all unlearning, but this should not happen at the expense of each other. We take care of each other. If you're in the studio, we will be wearing a mask, and we ask people to come back another day if they're experiencing symptoms or have come in close contact. Consent is one of the key foundations of how we operate together. So we seek permission before touching people, commenting on their appearance, belongings, or their artwork. And we ask and encourage everybody to articulate their boundaries. We lean heavily in towards transformative justice, meaning we aim to understand and address the root causes of conflict and power dynamics so that we can move past the conflict. Harm reduction. We aim to minimize judgment, and we recognize that people are capable of making the best decisions for themselves. We have supplies and disposal bins available. Finally, negotiation and harmony. Consider how your words, actions, perspectives, and art affects others. Use strategies to reduce harm and to encourage healthy relationships. This summer, we have a whole host of activities and programs that we're inviting people into, including Art in the Park, What's Cooking, the special barbecue edition. There'll be painting classes, audio recording, guitar lessons, the live jam, no skills necessary come through. We'll have sonic mentorship and the Next Step Leaders Lab, as well as the Legal Lab. So with all of that, I would love to introduce our first moderator, Pree. Pree goes by they and them. They are an interdisciplinary artist based in Toronto by way of Teotihuacan with Punjabi ancestry. Their art style, which is awesome, as are all the artists here, I'll contain my excitement, but it's inspired by community care, cultural heritage, and storybook illustrations. Pree's creative alias is @StickyMangoes. Their art has been featured in the Luminato Arts Festival, Design TO Festival, and the Art Gallery of Ontario. Their shop has been featured in CBC, Extra Magazine, and Blog TO. Pree is the creator of Crip Collab and Digizine, both of which create paid opportunities for artists who belong to disabled, racialized, and 2SLGBTQ+ communities. They're here to moderate the panel of what does it take to be an artist right now. Without further ado, panel number one, thank you so much. And welcome to Sketch.
Thank you, Julian. And I'll invite the remaining panel to please come join us as well. Maybe I'll pass this one to Cilla. Is this on right now? Yeah. I'm so sweaty. Please excuse me for a second. My mustache sweat. Okay. So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to today's first panel, which is what does it take to be an artist now? I'm joined with 4 wonderful artists that I will introduce as they move into their questions. But we're basically going to be talking about what things are bringing us joy, some of our challenges, and kind of talking about the social inequities that have been coming up a lot at this time. So we'll be going through some things around ableism, isolation, trauma, environmental degradation, the impacts of the pandemic, and the dismissiveness of the mainstream art world. But we'll also be talking about how we can forge a path forward, how we can forge a path towards solace, accessibility, healing, DIY practices, sustainable livelihoods, and our purpose as creators. So again, thank you for joining us today. Let's hear it for our first panel. Okay, amazing. So our first question is for Rosie. I will read out their bio. Give me 1 second. Okay, so Rosie. Rosie Monday is a songwriter and community leader. They were born and raised in Toronto. As a first-generation Canadian, the intersections of her life experiences shined through in her sound and songwriting. Rosie has been composing, recording, and performing professionally since 2012. Her crisp, thoughtful rhymes and infectious energy is winning supporters locally and across the country. If you haven't seen Rosie's music video that was shot in their parents' grocery store, you need to go check it out. It's amazing. So, Rosie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Our question for you is, what resources are you tapping into as artists right now, and why are they important?
Nice. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I just have to acknowledge, like, this mic sounds really good. You'll see just now. Yeah. That's a big question to start with, and I'm sure, like, as the panel goes on, we'll have everybody add to it bit by bit. Because, I mean, as an artist, it's from my perspective, from my experience, the tools that I've been tapping into are just the tools that enable me to continue to grow and engage with my environment, engage with my craft, continue to develop my craft. So full stop there, because there's a lot to that in and of itself. Due to the pandemic, something that I felt was really, really necessary was slowing down and being able to just tap into my immediate support networks. Be mindful of my own routines, practices, thoughts. And so in that, I started journaling a lot. Because I feel I'm best at creating and developing my craft when I'm grounded. And I'm in a space that I can have a clear mind. I'm, like the road mapping is really important, just so I can be very intentional with what I'm doing. So journaling became a very, very important tool for me. Like having a daily movement routine was something that's really important, because from there, now, let's say I need to apply for a grant, or I need to work on a bio, or I need to do certain things that are gonna enable me to access things like funding or even collaborations, or, take advantage of certain opportunities. When I'm in that space, I can articulate myself clearly enough that I get the desired effects, or I get the desired outcomes. Does that make sense? Right? So I can talk for long, guys. I'm just I don't know if we have timers or anything, but yeah, that's a major chunk of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned like needing to ground yourself, and one of those ways being journaling.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, like, are you someone that likes to free write, or are there prompts? Like, how do you do it? And maybe what's your advice for folks that maybe want to try to start journaling as well?
Yeah, so like from this practice, or the practice of journaling, I actually developed a book. It's called a mood check journal. So it's a combination. So I do both. To answer your question first, I do both. I free write, like if there's something on my mind, I just want to get it out, I do that. And then I'll also make like checklists, like things I can just kind of like, oh, okay, I did this, or I need to do this, I do that. So there's like one page will have a prompt on it, and then the other page will be like, okay, like a checklist, or like just like checks to like list things. So yeah, I do both.
Where can we buy the mood check?
So moodcheck.ca, of course on your web browser, and also on Instagram. You can send me a message on IG, or you can go directly to the website if they're up yet. They might be up in like a day or two. Today is what, June
something.
22nd. Yeah, they'll be available.
What is time? What is time, right?
What is time?
It's a colonial construct. We don't observe time here.
Fair.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for sharing, Rosie.
Nah, thank you.
Okay, so I'm hoping that our chat moderators can drop the link in the chat because I need to buy that. And then same question for the rest of our panel, if anybody wants to add to that. And the question originally was, what resources are you tapping into as artists right now? Does anybody want to add to that?
So one resource that I've been tapping into, I guess, for the last couple of years would have to be meditation and mindfulness practice. I do have a nervous system disorder, so I really found that just taking on certain tools and adding them onto my tool belt made it a lot easier for me to even just be an artist in general. I think having a high level of self-awareness has just given me the opportunity in general to just be myself and be authentic about what I love and the things that I'm passionate about. So yeah, if anyone would like to go, I can pass it on.
Thank you, Sumaiya. Maybe when we come back to your question later, if you can share more about mindfulness, that sounds awesome. So our next artist is E. Hello, how are you? Hello. And so E. Lee is an artist and filmmaker traversing queer, trans, and racialized identity politics. His work gestures towards a horizon defined by the radical embodiment of queer racialized lives. Studied in filmmaking, he works in video as well as graphic design. As a genderqueer Chinese artist and Canadian immigrant, he strives to expand creative growth opportunities for queer, Asian, and otherwise marginalized folks. E is also the owner of Silkfang, a queer affirmative merchandise retailer. So hopefully Jackie can pop the link to Silkfang in the Zoom chat as well, which makes really cool stuff. Yeah, so E, our question for you is, how do you navigate systems that neglect to acknowledge, oh my God, this is a long one, okay. How do you navigate systems out there that neglect acknowledging your experience as someone who navigates barriers to opportunities? So whether that's like in the art world, higher learning education, calls for submissions that aren't free, living costs, like if you can speak to, you know, how you kind of navigate different barriers.
Thank you, Rosie. Thanks, Pree. That is a really, really big question. I think what we're kind of getting at is a tension between working as an artist and living as an artist. Like, you know, it's one thing to make art part-time, and it's another to make art full-time and make that a possibility while still living in the city, which, as we all know, Canada and Toronto have really unaffordable living prices. So yeah, I think we all want to know the answer to that question. How do I work as much as an artist as much as possible and still afford living in the city? I don't have the answer to that question, but I will share anecdotally things that I do to get by. So for full transparency, I do live in a one-bedroom apartment in like right next to the village by myself. So that costs a lot of money to be able to maintain that. And I have I would say a pretty good deal on my rent. So the first thing I do is I work full time. And I work full time not necessarily doing the art that I want to be making. I work full time in kind of like an artist adjacent role where I work at a print shop. But you know, I think one thing that, even before I was working full time, one thing that I had to really come to accept is that there's really no shame in self-funding your art. You know, especially in Canada where we're privileged with the opportunity to apply for grants, I think we forget that self-funding is actually totally viable and valid. And actually, when you self-fund, you have more autonomy over your work. You have an almost more organic process of creation because you're self-funding, because the timeline is, depending on your relationship with the work, it exists outside of your capitalist practices, because, you know, for the sake of capitalism, I go into my 9 to 5. But when 5 o'clock hits, everything I do becomes part of my own free world now, right? So that's just how I get by. Is first of all, I'm not necessarily doing the thing that I always want to be doing. I'm working towards it. I'm building a portfolio to get another job that might fulfill a closer adjacency to what I want to be doing as an artist. But there's just no shame in self-funding, first of all, is what I wanted to say. And then a second point I wanted to make is that the city has a lot of youth opportunities. So fortunately, because I'm under the age of 29, I tap into a lot of youth resources where, you know, a lot of the time they're giving you a service and they're giving you an honorarium after the programming is done. And actually you're the one that, although, you know, you fulfill a mandate by being a participant, you gain a lot of, you know, just experiences and opportunities that you might not otherwise be afforded to. So working full-time is one thing. Youth opportunities is my second. Although the flip side with youth opportunities is once I turn 30, there's a wealth of resources that I no longer have access to. So that is a little bit daunting as well. And it's a little bit intimidating to have that pressure to have it all figured out by the time that I'm 30, because so much of my income currently relies on youth opportunities. And then the last point I wanted to make was that I also do work part-time as an artist, specifically through Silkfang. And even, I would say, even though it's my business, I would argue that Silkfang is not necessarily everything I want it to be as an artist. There's a lot more I want to do, and I think there's a lot more creativity that can come through my work through Silkfang that isn't happening right now. But regardless of that, through Silkfang, I do things like, recently I've gotten a lot more into craft and vending markets. So that's also extra income that helps me get by. And, you know, not even just get by, but have extra and have disposable income and have, like I just adopted a cat, which means now I have to go to the vet, and all these other things. So yeah, that's me right now these days. There's no shame in self-funding your art. In fact, it gives you more freedom. And, you know, even though it sounds like there's a lot of like hustle culture, which I totally am guilty of, actually people who make higher incomes diversify their income streams. Actually, people who make a lot of money make a lot of money a lot of ways. So there's really no shame as an artist having that versatility to adapt. That's actually smart. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. I have some follow-up questions for you. I wanted to know, okay, so one, I'm 31 right now. So Sarah knows this. I used to talk to Sarah about this all the time. I was like, I'm gonna turn 30 and I'm gonna fall off the system and I don't know what I'm gonna do, because going through youth programming is like a big way that I was able to support myself and like really be able to afford rent. So I'm right there with you. I think something that's been wonderful is I'm finding that programming at places like Sketch, Jayu, and some other orgs as well, are like, if you just turned 30, like you can still do stuff and it's fine, we have some spots kind of thing. And I've also found that like reaching out to orgs and being like, hey, I'm really interested, like, is there possibly an extra spot? Can I be in the program even if you don't pay me an honorarium? It's been helpful. But what I wanted to ask you is like, when you're working a full-time job to kind of cover the rent piece, and then you're doing Silkfang part-time, and I feel like this is something a lot of us do where we have a job and then we have our art jobs as well. I wanted to know, like, how do you maintain work-life balance?
Everyone wants to know that. That's a good question. So I intentionally chose a full-time job that is not demanding, does not, like, you only have so many spoons for decisions a day. Like, you can only make X number of decisions a day. So I chose a job that, like, I was interested in working at a print shop because I met a really cool queer print shop owner that, like, got me hooked on the idea. So I knew that it would make me happy to be there. I would be gaining experience in something that I thought was interesting, but it would not require me to be heavily responsible. Like for example, my colleagues are responsible for accounts. They have clients. They have customers that they deal with. I don't do any of that kind of stuff. I just help with the printing process. So I chose something that I knew was not going to be demanding of my spoons, especially as like a disabled artist. Like we like spoons, it comes from disability theory. So we do need to be conscious of our energy and how we spend that. So I made that intentional choice, first of all. Second of all, I have a great boss. Like I also I was unwilling to, when it came to my job hunt, I was unwilling to compromise a workplace environment because the job I was working before had a really like unhealthy workplace environment. So the boss that I work with is very, like for example, my boss and I have had conversations about being polyamorous before, which is like, I could have never asked for that when I was doing the interview. So there is that. I'm very privileged in the sense that my full-time job doesn't burn me out inherently, whereas I have definitely had previous jobs that were like much more aligned with my art that burn me out so quickly. And then also, like, I take a lot of breaks when I need to, especially with my art and especially with Silk Fang. And I've found that through mindfulness practices, I've realized that less is more, and that those breaks, it's interesting, you know, you don't want to take too long of a break that you're not making art anymore, but those rest periods are when I get my better ideas, and then I put pen to paper, and then I take a break. I get more ideas, I put pen to paper. So actually rest is a huge part of the artistic process, and it's okay to do that, which I think we forget because again, you know, you had originally, you had submitted prompts about COVID and arts practice. So I'll speak a little to that. When COVID hit, I was like, oh my God, I have all this spare time. Why am I not literally making art every waking minute of the day? I should be ashamed of myself for not, like, but that's ridiculous. That's so ridiculous. That's unrealistic and it's not healthy. So yeah, I think taking breaks, and I'm still figuring it out. And you know, don't be too ashamed of yourself if you're listening to this and you haven't figured it out. I think everyone wants to know the answer to that question, how to have a happy work-life balance.
Yeah, I knew it was a trick question, but I asked it anyways. Thanks, E. I think the recommendation around trying to find a day job that isn't extremely demanding and respects your boundaries is like really key to that. So thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna move to our next artist, Cilla. And so Cilla is a Black first-generation Canadian of Caribbean descent. They identify as femme, non-binary, and queer, and they specialize in metalsmithing and silversmithing. Priscilla uses metals to encapsulate raw stones and earth materials to showcase their unique beauty through the creation of handmade spiritual artifacts. Check out Cilla's shop. Their new metalsmithing, the little torch stuff, is very cool. I really like seeing your time-lapse videos on Instagram. And our question for Cilla today is, how do you support yourself as an artist? And like thinking about, we've talked about some of the financial pieces, but how do you support yourself as an artist mentally?
Thank you, Pree. Yeah, this is a nice mic. Mentally, I would say it's been a journey. So I've just gotten into the routine of doing like more movement because I realize my body really needs movement, especially when anxiety starts like getting like real riled up. I like doing qigong, I like meditating. I also like setting boundaries with friends, families, work as well too. I try to do things that make my heart happy rather than make me sad or upset or try to pull me back into like the darkness. Those are the sort of the things that I've been doing, as well as trying not to set like time, like being like, okay, 6 a.m. I'm gonna wake up, that's when I'm gonna start my day. No, I try to be a little bit more easier on myself and be like, when I'm ready to start my day, that's when I'll start doing my movement, that's when I'll do my meditation, that's when I'll look into like what work I wanna do that day. And I try to just take it easy, and I try to do things that make me happy. Like whether it's just like dancing, doing a little bit of art, talking to my family, things like that.
I love that. I'm curious, you mentioned like trying to do more of things that make your heart happy rather than things that kind of pull you into like darker feelings or harder feelings. How do you identify like what those like things that make your heart feel better are, or like how would you recommend folks kind of figure those out?
So I sort of check in with my body. If I'm doing something and I'm like, I really don't like being here, I really don't like how people are talking to me, I feel uncomfortable, people are asking me to do things that don't align with me or just as I was saying, being uncomfortable, then I'm like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that next time, and start looking for things that do align with me and do align with my work and my art. And yeah.
That's really good advice. And if I can add to that, one time when I was seeing a therapist, she was like, "What are you watching?" And I named a bunch of depressing stuff, and like I was watching Game of Thrones and stuff, and her advice to me was to watch things that make you laugh. And she recommended watching Schitt's Creek. This was like peak pandemic. And I was like, I don't want to watch some weird white family. Like, why are you recommending this show to me? And she was a brown therapist, and she was like, you should watch it. There's some queer stuff. You might like it. And then me and my family, like, all we did was watch all of Schitt's Creek for like the next month. But yeah, I think that's really good advice, to find things that kind of like make you feel lighter and bring you joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Pree.
I'm going to move into our last artist, last but not least. We're going to talk to Sumaiya. Sumaiya is an eclectic and visionary multidisciplinary artist, and they have over 10 years of artistic experience, captivating audiences through the use of bold, unexpected materials, combined with innovative color combinations using a variety of mediums. They seamlessly interweave a passion for fine art with a diverse range of multimedia art forms, including photography, graphic design and PR, illustration, landscape design, video and film production, and fashion. That's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. So Sumaiya, our question for you, if I can find it, one second. I'm gonna get there one day. Hold on. Crip time. Okay, my question for Sumaiya is, what skills do you lean on to navigate the creative industry?
Right, thank you, Pree. And I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. This is actually my first panel, so I appreciate
Oh my God!
it.
Big support for Sumaiya. Put nice things in the chat.
Thank you. So I did really like this question. It allowed me to have a lot of good self-reflection. And I think the best way for me to answer this, because this question has a lot of levels for me, just think of it as like a cake. So the first layer of the cake for me is communication skills. So this includes things like active listening slash empathetic listening as well, but not just in regards to other people outside of you, but also actively listening to yourself and just everything that's going on inside of your body. Because I think it's, like, for me personally as a disabled person, it's crucial for me to be aware of how much I can take on, how much I can give, and all of those things at the moment. So that's also where assertiveness comes in boundary making, because when you're out there in the creative industry, you're going to be coming into contact with a conglomerate of personalities. So I think it's so important to just be aware about the type of people that you'll meet, and who do you want to surround yourself with, and a lot of that can happen through communication. Now, the second layer of the cake would be technological skills. So, and this is coming from like the perspective of a designer, and I feel like understanding technology has made my career just a lot more easier in general. But I also understand too, like, not everyone has the privilege to use technology, and there are certainly many barriers. I experienced those barriers growing up, and for a while I just used to teach myself things like on my phone, through reading articles, and just looking for inspiration. Like, one person that I want to mention is Steve Lacy, because he calls this the bare maximum. And it's just about like working with things, like what you have, and doing it in the best way that you can. I also found that technological skills are important for me because I feel like it's easier to navigate the system when you're able to do things like create an invoice or create a proposal. It really allows you to have like more control over your business and the items you might want to create for clients or people, etc. And I would also add to that too, that technology has allowed me to expand the range of what I'm able to do. So because of that, I have more streams of income, and I'm building different skills in different areas, and it's all kind of adding to this bigger picture. And like the third and final layer of the cake would be interpersonal skills. So a lot of this has to, some things that come up for me are like critical thinking skills, self-reflection in regards to priorities and like your own self-worth. Because when you're out there in the industry too, it's very easy for people to take advantage of you, and especially if you're like a disabled person, like things can start to feel really overwhelming. So just asking myself those questions, like, what is my hourly rate? What type of salary do I actually want to be making? And are these opportunities I'm coming into contact with, are they aligning with my desires and my wants? Another thing I'll add to that too is when you're able to prioritize just things that are important to you, you're also able to attract like people in your life, like the right people in your life to lift you up. This is because I believe that we need the support of our entire community to be able to like reach our full potential in the first place. So just developing those interpersonal skills are really important to me. And one thing that I'll add to that too, actually E mentioned it earlier, was versatility and adaptability, which I also believe plays into interpersonality, because I found how beneficial it was for me to be able to wear many hats, or really switch up my point of view when life doesn't happen the way that I want it to happen. So being able to shift that inner mindset and all of those things has been extremely helpful to me, because that's one of my main philosophies, is that you can either like expand or you can contract. And that's one of my goals, is just to focus on expanding and mainly just reaching my full potential. So yeah.
That's really cool. Thank you. I really like the cake analogy too. That's amazing. For your first panel, you like brought a whole, there was a process, you walked us through it. That was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So before we wrap up today, I think we might have one or two questions from the Zoom chat.
We have one question from the chat. Someone is asking, how do you set your rate as an artist? And what do you consider when you decide on what your rate is?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to answer that. So one thing that comes up for me and how I figured out how to set my rate is I usually just do research on what someone in my position would be making, and then from there I just come up with my own thing for what I think that I'm worth. But a lot of it comes through taking in more perspective from people doing similar things to you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, definitely doing the research, like what other creatives are charging for similar services, and then also taking into consideration what it's going to cost you to execute whatever the thing is. So if it's I don't know, if it's a show, it's like, what are your transportation costs? Maybe considering rehearsal time. You know, like maybe if you need to reach out to engineers for like the tracking, like what your expenses are going to be. Consider that, and then also like what you'd like to get paid for the service itself.
You can actually Google it. there's a website called Carfac, and Carfac is a Canadian organization that sets reasonable rates for artists. It doesn't cover everything under the sun, but Carfac is technically like the minimum agreed upon rate that Canada has for artists. CARFAC.
Yeah, Carfac is a great resource. It's in the Padlet. I knew that. The other thing I was going to say is, just to add to your point, Rosie, you were talking about transportation. It's oftentimes, like, I think most of this panel identifies as being disabled artists. Like, if you reach out to an org and if you're like, hey, is there access funds for me to be able to, like, Uber to and from the gig or the workshops or whatever it is, just always ask. It's always worth asking. But yeah, Carfac is a really good resource, and it's in the Padlet. So thank you for today's panel. Y'all did amazing. Thank you to the artists. Thank you to the IRL audience and our interpreters and the at-home audience and Sketch for putting this on. We're going to wrap up here and take a 5-minute bio break, and then we'll move into performances. Thank you, everyone.